Okay, welcome to the 5th annual crash course. My name is Natalie, and this is...
Hi, I'm Diana.
And we're going to have Brent Porter as a speaker from the School of Architecture presenting on sustainability at Machu Picchu. And I just wanted to mention that directly after this event, there is an event in the incubator downstairs. So just some refreshments and celebrating the 5th year of this event. So please come. So without further ado, Brent.
Okay, thank you. What you're getting here is sort of about 10 slideshows. We'll have 2 or 3 slides from each of those. But I want to start out by really saying that Machu Picchu itself, which many of you can still visit, and they're doing a great job in maintaining it as the Inca would have known it. He would have been brought in from Cusco on a litter of 4 men, where along the Inca Trail, takes about 4 days, even today, from Cusco. And unlike the films that show young Peruvian actors in little red shorts, I don't think that's quite the way they did it. But in the first slide here is, while I say that Machu Picchu was and is sustainable, the town below it, Machu Picchu Pueblo, or on your internet, on google.earth, it's listed as Aguas Calientes, is absolutely not sustainable. And the last half of my discussion will be of what we're doing at the School of Architecture with the local people to help with that. And in the weavings, I found that in my own bedspread, that the sustainable S was very much alive from the Peruvians. Now, the basic summary here of what I want to go through with you is, as the equivalent to the US President's Camp David, the Inca retreated to Machu Picchu, where he sponsored not only passive solar and shading with natural ventilation throughout, but also adherence to sustainable agriculture, preservation of indigenous vegetation, and practice of 9 principal crafts using native materials, as you see in the weavings here today that are still being done. The principal agricultural terraces produce 3 crops of corn per year, and their exacting location enhanced daylight for the growth and passive, enhance the daylight for growth and passive solar gain in rounded stones beneath the ground, fist-sized stones, by the way. Further, the southwestern mountainside provided afternoon shadowing at the hottest times of the year in December and January. Remember, it's just opposite from us in climate. Other crops were located in a variety of ecologically sensitive parts of Machu Picchu, and their byproducts, along with native grasses, were adapted, recycled, and woven into a variety of products. Today, the town below suffers from the lack of sustainability, where 800,000 visitors arrive and depart each year. The first thing that we discovered years ago, we started this about 22 years ago, our work at the School of Architecture on Machu Picchu. I got from the National Geographic people in Washington a map that was done soon after Hiram Bingham discovered Machu Picchu. And we immediately went about casting shadows from the surrounding mountains. And we found here with the great Huayna Picchu that you see in all the images and drawn by my daughter in our 2 trips, frankly, even its shadow does not fall on Machu Picchu. It falls just short. If you look there below at the buildings, the twin buildings are on the left at the bottom, the shadows stop right behind them. And the other mountains are similar. So we knew we were onto something. And the Incas knew what they were up to. Now, if I can get this to work, I may need your help. I want you to see the shadowing, if I can get it to come on. It may not want, let's see, there's the arrow. Okay. And here is, if it'll work, I'm not sure. Oh, it's working. You can see the principal shadowing of the surrounding mountains. Machu Picchu is to the left, and that winding path up the mountain takes about an hour, 100 buses per day. Talk about unsustainable. So the town of Huayna Picchu itself, and this is just a summary of the shadows, it as well is very much benefited by the available sunlight and the lack of adverse shadowing. And here is the most adverse shadowing. And I think it's fascinating that as that mountain comes down the town, immediately in the center, the shadowing of it, by it, somehow misses the building. So I think the one good thing you can say about the town development is at least they followed the Machu Picchu example and trying to keep everything in the sunlight. Now, the first biggie, when you arrive behind those terraces, those are the great agricultural terraces. You can come over to the School of Architecture and see detailed section of those. But in the primary sun in the winter, which is June and July, is falling in the morning directly on those terraces from the left. And then as the sun moves around, even in the late afternoon, do we have a pointer? I can just point out here. Sunlight in the morning, and then the late sun in June and July is coming, it misses the rock quarry and still reaching the terraces for the basic two crops. Then in December and January during the summer, what happens is that sort of big chunk of mountain there on the right, upper right, that shadows the late afternoon sun. I grew up on the farm in Missouri. My dad always worried that the corn at the edges of the field were always taking too much sun and abuse, and they were getting wilted, and they didn't grow as high as corn in amongst the other corn stalks. So we found that in various visits that corn would have really done quite well. Now, immediately in front of us, we always talk about sustainability in that we try to get local materials as close as we can. Well, as in many of the Inca sites, the rock quarry is still there. It was there at the time. And you can see how they are still carving blocks out there in the quarry. Immediately below that then is the plaza that leads up to the famous Inti. And the next thing I want to make sure you see are the granaries. Now, again, to show you, as you actually come in behind these and you see people arriving. The reason we don't go on June 21 anymore, we go a week before. 26,000 people arrive on the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd. The shortest day of the year is the 21st. But look at this. The granaries are designed for different kinds of crops. On the upper granary, it's on 2 levels, and that's basically for corn. And for other vegetables, notice the roofs are different. The sizing of the granary is different. There's one missing completely. Apparently Bingham just wiped out so many things when they tore out the trees back in the early 1900s when he had discovered it. But the granaries are a beginning of this wonderful indigenous sustainable aspect of Machu Picchu. Here is a close-up of that upper granary. And another very important thing on the left is that air could come in, the cooler air at the bottom and rise up and go out this opening. And like we always tell our young architects, if you can bring air in 1/3 or 1/2 the size of the space you're taking it out, which is twice or 3 times as big, then you get much more drying and ventilation, and that's exactly what they did. Now for the other roof is possibly for shedding water in a different way, but we believe it was used for the potatoes. We may be a little bit wrong, but the openings are much smaller and they at the end, but the bigger openings are on the sides, and that would provide for drying out of potatoes, which some of you who grew up on a farm like me, their mothers and fathers always did. So the potato, there are actually 500 varieties of potato in Peru and Bolivia. I heard someone who was had been in Bolivia here. The Irish didn't start the potato. It traveled from South America to Ireland. But anyway, to set that record straight, as you come in, you can see as you cross the great terraces and you come into the main heart of Machu Picchu, it is just an incredible delight. And notice those terraces are at a different angle than the main, if you will, Camp David for the Inca. The first thing on you kind of hit is on your left. This is that immediate area right in where the clouds are rising. That's what we call the rich folks housing. To be high income and be with the Inca was to live lower. And the Inca then, it's hidden from the view right here, but he lived directly across. So right in the middle of the slide, if we could see behind that bit of outcrop, that's where the Inca's palace was. And then we're going to see to the far left the 5 courtyards in a few minutes. Most people know the Inti. In 2001, celebrated it as a stele. This happens to be, I've just got to check my timing. This happens to be on the equinoxes, March 21 and September 21. The sun is coming from setting due west. And this is a moment before it sets. And we've studied the Inti a great deal. Not only is it a sundial, not only is it a observational pointing to Mars and Venus, and the University of New Mexico and the Phoenix University have studied this in great detail. But imagine here a priest or the Inca himself bowing down in the foreground on the altar and celebrating the sun. And of course, this was the main height of worship in Inca religion, as it has been in many indigenous religions. The fascinating thing about it is when you're there, you're welcome to join us on June 5th for our 15th Pratt trip this year. When you're standing around, if you could understand all the languages, for every 10 to 12 groups that come through, a completely different story is being told about the Inti and what it did, etc. And one of the things we discovered early on was that actually the top of well, it's unfortunately broken, a little chip off it now, but the top of the Inti, the north-south angle it's not pointing north-south, as it may seem here, but actually north-south is a diagonal across the top rectangle. And we've done a lot of studies of not only hour by hour seeing what it did, but we have also found that it really was a timekeeper. And the Reinhard and his two books, his revised book on Machu Picchu, if you want to get the definitive source, Reinhard, R-E-I-N-H-A-R-D, he is truly the definitive source, and he shows these points where the sun is setting at different times of year. One of the exciting things is that on February 14th and October 29th, the sun is directly overhead. We used to be told that the Incas put a pole in this piece of carved diorite granite stone at the end of the Inti platform. But now the feeling is that the sun at noon was coming directly overhead and it fell through the hole, and they didn't need a pole to do that. But if they did have a pole, it's interesting. You could be at the Inti and sight through the windows. They're calibrated so that one is close against the wall. You see right in the middle of the slide, and this outer one then is moved over a little bit, and you could experience the sun directly overhead on that particular 2 days of the year. Well, another thing that we'll see later on, the final big topic I'm going to talk about is how did they cook. But in none of their courtyards do you see a place, any evidence of anything being cooked. But you do see hollowed out diorite stone where they put water, and they did not look at the sun, they looked at its reflection. And they could tell the time by looking at the reflection. Other aspects, notice the equinoxes of March 21 and September 21. There's a window there at the top. Much of this is destroyed now, but there's a window. Likely it was covered with a typical Inca roof. But that sunrise occurs through the window, and then the setting sun is a little bit different. It falls on the Inti, as we saw before. Another diagram, it's a little bit complex. My daughter's own sketch of that phenomena about the window I just mentioned, that one window is placed right against the Inti's enclosure and the other's out further. Here you see it a little bit clearer here. But there's a lot of other stuff going on. The other windows we've discovered over the years, and again, using Reinhardt's book, we have found that they really understood their passive solar, and if you will, their sacred solar. I think it's fascinating that the Inca, as sort of the last in the line of the pre-Maya, then the Aztec, and then later the Inca, that all of these societies were to one degree or not sustainable. The problem with the Maya is that they outdid their agriculture and their sacrifices of people, and they ended up not having too many people left. In the case of the Aztec, pretty much a similar situation. Again, they didn't have the forest like the Maya did, but the Aztecs grew too much corn and too much agriculture in general on land that didn't get properly refurbished in terms of natural fertilizer. So they died out. Here is one last complex diagram. This is the kind of thing I do on the site. one really fascinating thing, you see the top of the Inti here, that north-south line that I mentioned. It's interesting how a knowledge of Machu Picchu is so completely different around the world. We found a German study that showed that diagonal exactly reverse. And I'm sure what happened was when the publication occurred, they simply flipped it and had the diagonal across the Inti wrong. Notice the south stone that the Incas carved right in the middle of the slide. That points directly south because they didn't have the North Star at Machu Picchu or in Inca culture in large. I believe maybe somewhere near Quito, that would be more in Central America and late Aztec and early Maya, but they celebrated the South. And when we were able to used to go out to the site, you can't go out beyond 6 o'clock now, or excuse me, 5 o'clock. We would be there on the shortest night of the year, which was June 21, and the 4 stars, which would be the reverse of a cross, but 1, 2, 3, 4, that was directly south. So imagine the sacredness of that, and also imagine when all of those Quechua people, they were Incas, were introduced to Catholicism, the idea of the cross was something they pretty easily adapted. So that's a very important triangle that's carved right on the site. It gives a key to everything else. And then you can see these other windows and the kinds of articulation that occur. One of the things that happens on the shortest day of the year, you can get on those little steps on the left. And when the sun rises, it hits the Inti and it creates, it falls in your face. And some people go to Peru to be zapped, if you will. I perhaps should not tell the major company, but one of the CEO's spouse was there to be zapped on June 21, and we helped her get there on time. Now, the other biggie, my daughter's sketch on the left, and the slide from the internet actually on the right, the solar temple is called the Torreon. And it's, again, between the practical aspects of sunlight and passive solar and the sacred aspects. On the shortest day of the year, we are there when the sun falls through the June 21 window and falls on the back of the Puma. And let's go to that right now so you can experience it. We get out to the site. We have a lot of others that are gathered on the terraces above the Torreon, but we try to get there even earlier. Every year, the fog has sat, or the mist, if you will, has been in the valley. And almost on cue, like the Metropolitan Opera chandeliers going up, the fog lifts. The sun comes from across the way and comes through this window and forms a perfect rectangle. And it's one of those awe-inspiring moments that you have to experience someday. Here are some of my slides that give you a sense of that single ray of sunlight that hits. There's some question about the Puma himself. Is his head near the window, or is it in the back? Is his front paws forward or at the back? But that, where the rectangle is, immediately to the left is his tummy. So everyone agrees on that. And finally, we have as it's diminished, okay? Now, what we've discovered at Pratt is there's a Torreon to put the sun to bed. And no one's ever discussed it. I'm the only one that's trying to publish this. Frankly, the exact reverse of the Torreon on the east to greet the sun is on the west side of Machu Picchu. And the alignments are really fascinating. Also notice in the very middle of the slide, the water temple. We always wondered why it was about 8.5 degrees off of the sun temple and all the other orientation. I believe the Incas remembered the people, the Nazca lines to the south, which was part of their empire. And I think this, we had a student work all semester on this on Google.earth. It turns out the water temple at Machu Picchu is oriented to the closest ice-covered mountain. It's still ice-covered, and the Inca are still happy, I think, about that. But that explains why it's at this unique angle. In the Nazca area where we fly over the lines, there was the principal line to the main source, maybe 100 miles away, of an ice-covered mountain or source of water. And then there was a secondary line to a second source. As the years went by, there got to be more and more lines ad infinitum. So it's a mess today. But we believe we've really discovered something. And this we are hoping to add to the discussion. Another thing, like the Torreon in the morning, from morning sun. It's the most smooth, beautiful stone at Machu Picchu. The similar smooth, excellent stone is on the what I call the afternoon putting to bed Torreon. When Bingham's men got the trees pulled out, they did a mess on the job. And we don't have the little windows for June 21, the equinoxes March and September 21, and also in the summer, December 21. But we do have that in Cusco. And you'll see that in a moment. Here you can see the beauty of the smooth stone. There is a stone that I think got moved here on the Torreon in my sketch on the right. I think that clearly pointed to the setting sun on December 21, the longest day of the year. But it's hard to know whether they moved it when they were cleaning out the trees. But it's clearly a reverse of the Torreon. And the reason we know how it works, when you're in Cusco, this is a great Torreon, the main capital city of the Inca, and this incredible smooth stone of the diorite granite is only topped by the Catholic Church. When the Spanish hit, they immediately got busy. And inside, though, over the years, they've really preserved the original Inca temples. Temple of the Lightning, Temple of Mother Earth, Temple of Thunder, Temple of Sun. Well, this is a sun temple. And what's interesting, if you notice right in the middle of the slide where it drops back down to the retaining wall, that is exactly the proportion of this little baby afternoon Torreon at Machu Picchu site. And here's another view of it and a comparison to the one at Machu Picchu. By the way, on the right, imagine when the Spanish hit, there were about, I'd like to think 100 to 200, I think the guides say, gold statues. Just imagine, they must have thought it truly was El Dorado. And they quickly went about melting all that gold down and sending it back to Spain. But you can experience this for yourself somewhat. Now, again, my daughter's sketch, she did many of them. I want to take you now to the courtyards. There are 5 courtyards. And remember, at Machu Picchu, to be of high status, you live lower and across from the Inca. But if you were workmen families of the different crafts, you lived up higher. And there are 5 courtyards with at least 5 of the crafts, if not more. Maybe people were doing dual crafts. There in the middle of the slide, you can see the repetitive, beautiful Inca profiles. Now, looking from an aerial view of this, there in the upper area, I have 2 of my Israeli students carefully counted those steps to make sure we were doing the simulations right. And there are 71 steps. Whether it was 72 or 71 is maybe conjecture, but that was a biggie and numbering in the Incas. The so-called rich people are at the bottom of the slide, and it's probably the most perfect Inca building is actually a community center. It has a rock wall that goes down the middle, and men were on one side, women were on the other, and they could pass goodies, like you'll have at noon today, or I think in a few minutes, through those openings in the wall. And whereas the people on top, they had openings in the shared wall, but they passed weaving materials or ceramic materials, etc. And we'll see that in a moment. And let's go there now. One of the findings we have, here we're coming into the first of the courtyards. Machu Picchu's main plaza is out through that doorway. We discovered that in this corner here on the left, if you draw a line between what you would think was the southwest corner, across the courtyard to a halfway point, you get the exact north-south line. And over the years, we've seen that in the winter months of June and July, that was just excellent to bring the morning, noon, and afternoon sun, which is actually in the northeast, the north, and the northwest sky, in for passive gain. And the courtyard itself was a major collector. It didn't have to be paved over. And of course, the stone itself was a major passive collector. But then in the summer, when the sun reverses slightly to the southeast, the south and the southwest, the roofs themselves are shading the areas inside and part of the courtyard. The courtyard gets hot, but then that causes a suction upward. And what happens? That draws cool air through the buildings and up and out. So they really understood what they were doing. Here's a little bit bigger view of it. That doorway on this, actually the reverse. We're looking here northeast. And here you can see those windows where they would have passed goods. One family, let's say of about 20 individuals, would be in this courtyard. They could share things through those windows. If they wanted to, they could go out the door, and there was a little narrow street linking the 5 courtyards. But there was a kind of, I think that we can imagine our own president, if he went to Camp David and there were the leading computer people, the leading ceramicists, the leading weaving people, and for you coming in late, this kind of wonderful weaving was being done in Inca times and remains today. All of that was happening, I think, in a more sequestered way, in that they could concentrate their efforts. Maybe they didn't even share secrets among themselves. We don't know. Now, early on, one of my students drew a north-south section through those courtyards. And if you look at the orangey-yellow area, that shows this condition of the passive gain in the winter. So the sun, remember, is coming from the northeast, the north, and the northwest sky. So all of this is soaking up passive solar. But then in the summer, the other angles going this way create, he didn't add the blue shadow, but the bluish lines, again, in cross-section, not in 3 dimensions, they are indicative of the sun shadowing, hitting the roofs and shadowing. Now, one of the other areas we're researching, and Senor Esteti, who's the chief archaeologist we meet with every year, this is an area that is not even named yet. You notice the twin buildings at the end. They are very special in that they have a stone between them that is exactly the profile of the mountain in the distance, and thus most people call that the mountain worship area. But this is a strange, the only way you can say is it's a geometric shape that represents the sun. And the one single part of the Inca language that we're absolutely sure, the experts are all sure, is the one in the middle represents the sun. Sunlight, sun, we'll see some varieties of it in a minute. Also, I can't find this dish right now. There's an old gentleman, I drew a sketch of what I wanted, and the next day he came to our hotel in Cusco with this wonderful antique plate. You see a little portion of it on the upper right. But those are different dynamics of the sun diagram. Could it mean the 4 seasons? This immediate image right here, could that mean the 4 seasons? I think it probably did. There is for any of you who speak Chinese, we're trying to find the Chinese lady who is working on the Inca language. And we can't find her. She's obscure somewhere, I think at a university, if not in China, somewhere else in the world. But we're waiting for her to tell us. And we think that another important thing, the Incas, we also know the stair-step idea of 1, 2, 3. And you see that on the lower right, the past, the present, and the future. And this was often a principal dynamic in not only how they laid out their developments, but also it allowed passive solar gain to reach the courtyards or main plazas in the case of Machu Picchu. Here is a weaving I brought back, again with the sun symbol. Clearly the 4 quadrants, there has to be a carrying on of the, I think rather innocently by the local weavers in today's world, even though they speak Quechua, the language of the Incas, still, as well as Spanish, and very little English, if probably none, that frankly, I think they are inadvertently carrying on the Inca language. And tune in later till we know more about that. Now I want to quickly just show a few more quick slides of how the indigenous construction of the Inca buildings, of the grass roofs, the incredible use of eucalyptus. In the 1920s, the Peruvians had cut down all their forests. They didn't have anything left, so they had to import eucalyptus from New Zealand and Australia. But this would be the original trees that would have been available. Here you can see a typical layout without the roof, and then those poles on the ends of the dwelling that they tied the roof down. Here's the water temple, as I mentioned earlier. You notice the Torreon on the left is at the principal angle of the rest of Machu Picchu, except the big terraces. But this water temple, we're sure, points to the local snow-covered mountain. Now, Peruvian indigenous, sustainable, if you will, color dyeing and weaving of textiles. This is my bedspread. What's funny about it is that Incas are smaller people, and it doesn't cover a whole bed, only about 2/3 of it. So in this, I'll be showing you some of these symbols. The women weave, I'm sure, very similar to what they did, if not before Inca times, certainly during the Inca times and to the present. And the biggest deal about this is it's not only locally grown cotton and other materials, but then the dyes are from local plants. And when you go, you can see various places where maybe 5 to 6 women are working, and they have different kinds of pots where they're stewing different plants to get the native colors. And it's just really quite delightful. Here you can see more of the weaving. And if you notice in the piece that's being passed around, they do it in strips and on different size looms, and then they sew them together. And here's still another, and a close-up. Now, I really believe that some other images probably reflect mountains. Could this be an image where the sunlight is hitting the mountains in different ways? It's carried down through the craft. It's hard to know. And I think that in your own generation, hopefully in mine, we'll be hearing more about this. Now, let's quickly go to the Quechua language. And I got to watch my time here. Peruvian indigenous derivative Inca, or the Inca spell it, or we are supposed to spell it I-N-K-A. The Quechua language, which may be sustainable through crafts while the Inca language is sought. Besides the current degree of understanding the quipu. Now, the quipu are the tied strings. This may be the only slideshow on Peru and Machu Picchu that will ever be given without the quipu diagrams. But we know a lot about that. 100, 10, 1,000, 10,000, etc., tied at different distances from the center of the quipu and carried by the young boys on the Inca Trail everywhere. So without going through all this script, let me just go on and show you some of the images. In honor of Sustainable Pratt, this is on our bedspread. My wife is not here yet, I don't think, to tell you that she cannot live in the winter without this over our other covers. Again, I think this is a sun symbol in some way, possibly showing the 4 seasons. And you notice 2 varieties of sort of the same idea. Here's another. Could this have to do with the way the sun comes between mountains? It's hard to say. Here's our bedspread. I've foreshortened it. It doesn't cover the whole bed. This is about 2/3. Now, the individual animals. Clearly, if the Incas were doing all their numeric communication with quipu, then surely they were using symbols like the different birds and the puma or cougar, whatever this is on the lower left, I'm not quite sure. And the idea of ducks or other birds individually or swimming or massed together. I mean, I think that if you were talking about a herd of ducks or something, you'd have the symbol below. What I'm wearing is baby alpaca, by the way. And does it reflect sunlight and mountains? We're not quite sure. You see that stair-step image on the left. This is a basic principle of the past, present, and the future. The different animals. Are these 2 different kinds of birds? And what on earth are these? Are these llamas? Probably so. And then we really get into complexity. I again think that the trapezoid is, and also the fact that it's often 3 trapezoids in one, which is important, and that the sun's been around from the past, present, future. My feeling is that this is a big deal, and continue to tune into that. And here's I didn't bring this, or could it be that today the craftsmen have just strung all of these symbols together in strips, like we might do graphically in our modern day. I won't go through all these design parameters, and I see they got somehow overlaid, but we've done a number of things in the town, and I want to go through this with you. We've worked on additional trails. We've worked on a solar patterning and sunlights for the town. We're a third of the town below Machu Picchu has rebars sticking up and no finish to their roofs or upper story, and thus they don't pay taxes. That's why all of us have to pay increasingly a bigger amount every time we go to Machu Picchu. And For us at Pratt, it's 3 days instead of 3 hours. We get a little bit of a break a second and third day, but we're working on it. Underlying geometry was Route 2, for you to know about that. The indigenous colors and materials, we're very much committed to making sure they continue. The diorite, the use of diorite granite, a lot of it's being done already. We think as an alternative to that, there's a certain gray stucco from diorite that can be an alternative. And energy-saving contemporary outdoor lighting is being worked on as we speak. And structural enclosures, temporary structures or housing of rooftops for completion of existing buildings. And this is really important. Here is the town below. It has a complete mix. One of the exciting things is, even though they didn't accept our solar envelopes, they did pass last year no new housing or hotels above 3 stories. And the unsustainable aspect of it is right down on the river where the flood wiped out many of the buildings. There have been several different 6- and 7-story hotels built right on the river. And the next El Nino, they're going to get wiped out. And so we are very carefully studying the slopes around the town to work on our trails. And we're also taking careful accounting of not only the sunlight, that blue line, my students done it slightly off. It's a little bit more curved, but it's basically a line in the June 21 period. But also we're working on the moon, and the moon, as you may know, moves from the left to right and the right to the left in 19.5 years. And so we think in the town, you can't be out to see the moon at night in Machu Picchu anymore, but why not see it from the town? This is the solar envelope of those principal June sunlight on the shortest day of the year. And from that, when they overlap, the center chunk can be a solar envelope like you see on the left. Another thing with my wonderful young man, Chihuahua, we've been working, I've actually photographed every building in the town. And some young Ivy League kids were watching me going every 10 feet. And they said, "Sir, what are you doing?" And I said, well, and I didn't smile. I said, "Well, you mean when you go to a historic place like Machu Picchu, you don't take a picture of every building in town?" And they thought I was pretty nutty. But now we've strung all these together. And the exciting thing, here you see the main town square with the surrounding. We are putting all these on a huge map. Now, this is another one, and this is the real thing. And we are showing how before and after. We've only other place I know is Malmo, Sweden, and they have photographed the entire town again after 150 years of having the drawings of elevations and plans. So we're going to have not only a record of what is, but what can be done with these existing buildings. And here, for example, look at this. This is near the soccer field. You'll see it in a moment. Much of the housing is incomplete. We've had students use native materials like bamboo for roofing. Here are a series of rooftop ideas that could bring restaurants and what have you to the rooftop. And here you can imagine how beautiful that would be. And another thing are the trails. These are my daughter's sketches along the Inca Trail from Cusco and then animals on the right. Here is our trails so far for visitors that we think that after they come down from Machu Picchu, then they can enjoy the local environment. Already the federal government has certain sanctuary points to enter in. We've carefully studied how to do these trails. We've got some wonderful kids with ideas for building bird watch stations. These are 3. This is Girolamo's. And now I want to show you what we're really working on. We've got an ugly building at the end of the soccer field that we think that not only we can bring the indigenous trails together, but we can finish the building. I'll be done in that because I've got my big surprise. So here is the ugly concrete building on the left. It's a mess. And so indigenously, we are doing different schemes to make it come alive again. And we think that the weaving, which you basically see in Chinchero, if you try to buy these products below Machu Picchu, it costs you a fortune, and you're likely to get things from China or elsewhere. So here's Mumtaz's idea to again try a way to weave the covering so that light could come through it. Here you see some examples of experiments. But then again, this would go on the outside of the building. What we're really interested in is a glass that people could project events, as they have done, on a big screen at the end of the soccer field, but let passive solar gain and light come through it. And also growing plants at the top, having samples and other things here. if you can't go up to Machu Picchu for when the sun comes up, why not be able to view it on the shortest days of the year? This element on the right looks toward the rising sun. Now, to one other project by my young Korean, different site studies for this. Wonderful project. It would have thermal siphoning solar. You can see the beauty of this project, and it incorporates the existing building. Now my big surprise is coming, if I can get to it. What about what they ate and what they cooked? Well, we know a variety of things, but it seems like how they really cooked was on a ceramic platform with slits in it. And so we are trying, and another idea of putting hot stones in a pot and then cooking on top of that. And we are looking, here's an example of how that would look. And what did they eat? Well, potatoes was their main thing. There's a wonderful chart here of their main foods. You can see the principal foods. But how did they store their food? Well, they really worked at it. The Inca Empire had a 3 to 7 year storage in the higher parts of along the Inca Trail in different places. Now, what I want to introduce to you, ta-da, we're going to introduce to the town to the rooftops. There are hundreds of thousands of these being used around the world. This is a passive solar filter. It just arrived at 4 o'clock in California this year. It's being used of indigenous people around the world. I may need help in getting this open. Now, wouldn't it be great that some of those rooftops, this goes in here. Okay, and we'll put this one in. Wouldn't it be great if people could experience this? So some of your food you get in Machu Picchu, Pueblo, this is the west, north, and east. And this is being used for people around the world. African, and my wife is arriving late, so too bad. Okay. And finally, just to show you this, I have all the ordering information if you'd like. Just look at the places it's being used in different countries. Here's a close-up of it. And this is upstate New York or in Connecticut somewhere. These guys are cooking on a big scale. I'd kind of like to see this done for next year's Green Week here on campus. I don't know if we get a chance to do it. But so that's basically it. And let me go back a slide. Maybe it's ended. Yeah, I think it is. Let's get up a light. Do come up and see this in person. If you'd like to come with us to Machu Picchu, you're welcome to take the larger handouts with my daughter's one-minute drawings, or the shorter one tells you how you sign up with us. And please look at the indigenous materials. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, I'm supposed to